Welcome to the Champion Stepdad podcast. We are exploring the unique role of stepdads, stepfathers, and bonus dads, and how to apply performance psychology skills to become a better father figure and role model. Building a band of brothers by focusing on empathy and accountability. Being a stepdad is tough. There's no reason to go at it alone. We are your support and your accountability. My name is Neil Wadier. I'm a 16-year stepdad. I'm also a resilience trainer and a performance consultant. This week, I'm joined by my friend, Steve Carr. He is a mental health first aid, workplace well-being, and suicide first aid trainer. He's the director of Mindcanyon, a UK organization encouraging mental health in your workplace. Before we get to the conversation with Steve, I want you to take a moment and think about your favorite sports team. Or if you don't have a favorite, because not everyone is a sports fanatic, think of a team that you're familiar with. Think about all the players that you might recognize on that roster, or a vision of a team with all the players. There's also practice squads. I know different sports are different around the world. In this example, I'm going to reference American football because I'm from the US, right? So in the United States, an American football team can have up to 53 players on their roster, and they can dress out 46 for each game. So 46 players dressed for the game, 53 players on their active roster. Once the season begins, they have to cut down. So last season, Super Bowl was won by Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tampa Bay, Florida, and led by, love him or hate him, one of the best quarterbacks in history, Tom Brady. I'm not a fan. Tampa Bay's not my team, but I gotta give it to him. Tom Brady's really, really good. And I want you to just imagine watching sports in general, because it's easy to pay attention to a small number of players that are at the center of the action. And we might even see a couple of coaches on the sideline, and we might even recognize some of their names. But how many of you that are American football fans, how many of you know the number of coaches employed by Tampa Bay to manage their 53-player roster? Number of coaches actually on their website with pictures, names, and positions. Number is 30. 30 coaches for a professional sports team. Head coach, assistant coach. You have defensive and offensive coordinators. Special teams, which is the punt, the kickoff, the field goal. You have quality control. I didn't know they had quality control coaches on an NFL team. I knew they had strength and conditioning, but they also have speed and conditioning. Each position or group of positions has its dedicated coach and assistants. And there might even be others unlisted, such as medical professionals, psychologists. I know most teams have psychologists and mental skills coaches. They're not even listed on the Tampa Bay website. So think about this for a moment. Tom Brady, one of the best coaches, one of the best players, one of the best quarterbacks in American football history, has upwards of 12 dedicated coaches. There's a head coach. There's an assistant to the head coach. There's 2 more assistant coaches. There's a quarterback's coach. There's an offensive assistant. There's an offensive quality control coach. There's a head strength and conditioning coach. 3 assistant strength and conditioning coaches. And there's a speed and conditioning coach. So the best quarterback in the world has upwards of 12 dedicated coaches. And that's not uncommon. You could probably do that for just about any position on the field. They all have upwards of 10 to 12 dedicated coaches. And as I mentioned, there might be medical professionals. Maybe they have, chiropractors or wellness practitioners. I know most of them have mental skills coaches or psychologists. So that many more coaches on top of it. These professional athletes at the top of their game are working with this many people. And they might have, outside of the official staff, might employ their own people. They might have specialized strength and conditioning coaches. They might have specialized medical professionals. And the reason why I bring this up is because being a stepdad, being a dad, being a parent, being a spouse should be given the same respect and dedication you put into sports, high-risk professions, performing arts, or business. This is why I have placed such a high emphasis on performance psychology skills. Yes, I'm studying this as a profession. Yes, I do resilience training and performance consulting as my job, but I bring these things into my home. As a military mental skills trainer, I work for a Department of Defense contractor, and I go and I teach mental skills to military professionals. One thing that has been researched in the past is a lot of old school military operators would use mental skills, whether they realized it or not. They would use simulation. They would use breathing techniques. They would use attention cues, performance cues, whether they realized they were doing it or not. And they were really, really good at it until they went home. And their home was just a wreck. That's why so many of them had mental health issues. They had drinking issues. They got into fights. They didn't have good home life. Not all of them, but a lot of them. They were not provided the skills. They didn't see the connection between their profession and home. Well, why wouldn't you want to apply these skills? The same skills that you use on a sports field or the battlefield or the business boardroom or on stage if you're a performing artist of some kind. As a stepdad, you can benefit from the same performance skills as a champion athlete or as a musician on stage in front of tens of thousands of people or a high-risk professional laying their life on the line. You're expected to employ specific skills and demonstrate them on demand, often in front of other people. You're often subject to judgment, even if it's just you and your spouse in the house. And your performance as a dad, as a stepdad, as a spouse, carries significant long-term consequences for you and your family. If you're listening to this podcast, I have a few assumptions about you. You want to be a better stepdad. You want to have a stronger relationship with your spouse. You want to have a stronger connection with your children and your stepchildren. You want to help them grow through stress and adversity and become the best version of themselves. You want to create a unified front with your spouse so that your house is consistent and dependable. A space for your children to explore, learn, and develop. You want to be challenged to critically examine your belief system and default behaviors so you can take control of yourself, control of your emotions and your actions to ensure you're being the best spouse, dad, stepdad that you can be. I hope so, because why else would you be listening to a podcast called Champion Stepdad? If I'm wrong, I'm going to keep it up anyway, because this is for me as much as it is for you. Everything I said above, everything that I just said is what I want. I'm not here to stroke egos. I'm not here to tell you how much I know. I'm here to demonstrate that I'm progressing through this just like everybody else. And I make just as many mistakes as you do. I love a good joke and talking about recreational hobbies and bullshitting with my buddies. But until we get into the difficult shit, until we're in a place where we can call each other out appropriately and challenge each other, we might as well just be down at the pub knocking back a few and telling lies about what's wrong with our spouses and our children. I'm here because I want to become better. As promised, in a few of the past episodes, I'm developing a Champion Stepdad membership. And I'm excited to announce it's going to launch June 1st. It's a low monthly membership. You'll receive monthly live calls to build your worldwide band of brothers. Worldwide, because there are several people that have jumped into the group from the UK. I've got friends of mine in Australia, Canada. Worldwide band of brothers. Small groups to connect for greater accountability, trust, and space to find and give support. Monthly challenges, because I want you to rope in your spouse and your kids as we challenge up. And I'm going to have a digital resource library. I'm going to have book summaries. I'm going to read the books and I'm going to give you the Cliff's Notes, the Neil's Notes, whatever you're going to call it. I'm going to have articles. I'm going to provide research if you're so inclined to read it. I'm going to record a foundational course, seven video series course of basic information, the basic stuff that you should know. or at least scratch the surface of let's get into this. And I'm going to provide a toolbox of all kinds of worksheets and papers and, cheat sheets, worksheets for you to go and do homework and challenge yourself and grow. Future plans. I'm going to have a Stepdad University. I'm going to build a curriculum. I'm going to have live monthly skills training, no different than the skills that I would go into a room with military operators and teach you performance skills. We're going to have virtual summits. I've got a huge network of people that I know, and they're all very, very good at what they do. And I've talked to many of them, and they're excited to be part of an organization, a group of people who want to do better. That's what they do. They want to help you be better. They're going to come in and they're going to be guest speakers. We're going to do question and answer opportunities. And I want to do in-person retreats. And that's fun for me. I love to travel. I love camping. I love going out and doing things. I'm tired of being stuck in my house. I want to go do stuff. I want to come visit you in the UK. I want to come down and visit Australia. I want to go to Colorado, Vermont, Texas, and Florida. I want to plan retreats and do, camping excursions, get-togethers. We're going to build this thing into a worldwide support organization, group of guys that want to be better, that want to help other people be better. I'm excited to launch this new edition to Champion Stepdad. Sign up will be available soon. It is going to go live June 1st. If you have questions, please hit me up. I look forward to seeing you there. Now, on to the conversation with Steve Carr, mental health first aid, workplace well-being, and suicide first aid trainer, also the director of Mindcanyon. Steve, thanks a lot for joining me on the Champion Stepdad podcast. We've been trying to hook up for several weeks, and I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us.
Neil, thank you for inviting me on. Sorry we haven't been able to connect before now, but it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be on your podcast. Yeah,
no worries. And you're a busy guy, and I want to jump straight into this. You're a busy guy because you are a mental health first aid and suicide first aid trainer. And just from that, we can kind of get an idea of what you do, but tell us, what are you doing right now, and why do you think it's so important? Why are you so passionate about this?
Yeah, sure. Well, you're right. Yeah, mental health first aid and suicide first aid trainers. I've been delivering mental health first aid and suicide first aid training for the past 3 years, but my business has been open for the past 6. Now, just 6 years ago, I experienced a mental health breakdown in the workplace, and sadly there were no mental health first aiders. There were no EAP, so that's Employer Assistance Program, and there was no occupational health for me to be able to speak to. There was nobody that I could go and talk about mental health openly. Just 6 years ago, it was still a topic that's very much, and sadly still is very much taboo. So I was signed off work. I was signed off work with work-related stress for about a month. And in that month, I was trying to figure out, what help was available and what I could do, and whether I wanted to actually go and speak to anybody about my mental health. And so I went back to work after a month, and I was invited into a meeting by my direct line manager, who said, Steve, we've seen your performance has kind of been in decline for the past 6 months. What's going on? And I couldn't tell him it was mental health related. So I just said, I'm kind of feeling the pressures of work at the moment. There's a lot of targets to hit, and I'm just feeling pressure, really. And so he placed me on a performance improvement plan. It's a very English thing. And these performance improvement plans are basically to monitor your performance with a set of KPIs. So if you don't achieve a certain percentage of these key performance indicators, you're monitored. And then sadly, for most people that are placed on these performance improvement plans, then actually their told to leave the organization. So they're kind of, they'll look at you and say, if this doesn't improve, which actually the performance improvement plan adds to the pressure, they'll actually manage you out of the business. And so it's an easy way for the organization to manage you out of the business. So that very same month, whilst I was managed out of the business, I lost my employment. I attempted to end my life by suicide multiple times, and this was just 6 years ago. And so that's kind of where, for me, I really needed to figure out what I wanted to do here, because attempting suicide is huge. It's massive, and as I'm sure you're aware, us men aren't great at speaking. We're really terrible at speaking. So I just want to give you a bit of a backstory, really, because I've said what I do now and how this kind of, my business was started 6 years ago. But there's a much bigger story. Would you like me to tell you more about the story, where it all began?
Yeah, I want to get to that, but I want to clarify a couple of things first. So you talk about KPIs and so key performance indicators. That's a common thing in business. We just have, my experience is U.S. military, and we just have a different terminology. So basically, what you're talking about is they have standards standards and goals that they want you to meet, and they measure your performance based on your ability to meet these goals and these standards. And then that's the way that they can determine if they want to keep you or not. And essentially what you were talking about is the culture wasn't there to accept, and you weren't in a place, you mentioned you weren't in a place to really have the direct conversation. So even if the culture was set up to help you, you were not necessarily in a place to have that effective conversation. So we're talking about a few things here. Number one is the workplace culture being set up to help people. Number two is the employees or people in the organization or the community, just the community in general, because it doesn't necessarily have to be an employment thing. The environment, the people in the environment have to be willing to speak up and take advantage of this. I was just having this conversation with my fiance, Cindy, last night, that there's been a large problem with mental health in the U.S. military for a long time. In fact, just a couple of years ago, the U.S. Air Force had triple-digit suicides in 1 year. It was bad. It was really bad. I want to say it was 2019. And people talk about, well, we don't take good enough care of our military. And 10, 15 years ago, that was a valid conversation. But the culture now has dramatically improved, and the services are there. But it's up to the individuals now to really say, I want to go find this, and there's still a little bit of culture change that needs to happen. But the culture can only change so much if the people aren't willing to step out and take advantage of those things. So first of all, I just wanted to talk through that a little bit, because I do want to hear your backstory, because I have heard some of it, and it's phenomenal. But I just want to emphasize the fact that we need to balance making sure that things are available, and individuals need to take responsibility to go do the things that are necessary. Like, both of those things have to happen before we're going to make any significant change. And I think this is a great conversation, because sometimes I get tired of hearing it, but guys just don't do this as good, right? We don't do it as well as we could, right? I hate the word should, as well as we could. But that's where our community comes in, because even if I as an individual don't just step directly towards a mental health provider, I can have a good circle of friends that I can step to, and maybe that can be my pathway to something else. But that also means that my friends need to be good friends and be like, look, dude, you're not okay. Like, I need to be able to have a circle of friends that has that. And so in building Champion Stepdad is the idea of having empathy, but also accountability, right? So being a first aid trainer, being a mental health first aid, I mean, first aid is, I don't need to be a medic to apply first aid. So I just wanted to talk through that a little bit, because again, this is just as much for me as it is for everybody else. And I just find it so fascinating after being in the military and being deployed and watching sometimes people really go south. So yeah, go ahead and let's go into your background. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. There's one point I'd just like to kind of recap on there, because I think it was a really good point that you made. There's a good old saying in England, I'm sure it's worldwide, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You are absolutely right. And in hindsight, did the organization do the right thing? Yes, they absolutely did. Because I couldn't talk to them about my mental health. So what does that instantly say? It says that I'm struggling. It's a competency-based issue, that it wasn't mental health related. Because had it been mental health related, that would have been a different conversation. But the conversation never happened. So that there wasn't the culture for it. You are absolutely right when you say organizations are changing now, which they are, which is fabulous. But were there the right circumstances to be able to have that conversation in the first place? No. If there was, would I be doing what I do now today? Who knows? But knowing it was there may have well helped. However, with what we're about to learn, and my backstory is, it may not have been enough. Just quite simply because it took me 25 years to actually reach out for help. And like you said just a moment ago, us guys struggle when it comes to asking for help. And I think it'd be really useful now to give your listeners some context as to why this can come about and some of those factors that can prevent us from actually going to ask for help. So I'm going to take you back in time a little.
Yeah, let me hear it.
So I was born in 1976, and as in a small family unit, and I have an elder brother by a year and a younger sister by a year. And all throughout my childhood, I just remember that it was a huge disconnection between my mother and father and my sister and my brother. We were not a loving family. There was often family feuds, more often than not. And the kindest way to say this, it was very physically and emotionally abusive for myself, for my mother, for my father. And it was a lot of physical and emotional abuse happened within the family. And by the age of 14, I really just wanted to run away from all this continual daily abuse. And so the easiest thing I found at the time was just to mask what was going on, this, traumatic by to drink. And so by the age of 14, I was experimenting with a lot of illegal drugs, from LSD, weed, ecstasy and speed, at a very early age. And so I started associating with other children that were just like me from kind of dysfunctional families, really. Lived on a very, very rough council estate. And it was just a very difficult upbringing. I just remember there were more bad times than there were good. So my father was a mechanic by trade, and he was the only worker in the family. My mum was a stay-at-home housewife, so she would look after all of us children, make sure that we were all catered for and cared for. My dad was the sole breadwinner. And I remember when I was 15 years of age and had a conversation with my brother one morning. I can remember the morning. It was Friday, 13th of September 1991. And we'd just come down to the breakfast table, and we used to share this bedroom together. And he was a heavy metal lover. So he had the bottom bunk, and all around the walls of his bottom wall was heavy metal posters and pictures and what have you. And then I was into rave music. So above it, we had all these rave pictures and posters. And he had half of the bedroom, I had the other half. So he would play his heavy metal music and I would play my rave music. And the noise that used to come from our bedroom was just horrific. I just remember one Christmas, my parents bought us both a set of headphones, which cured the issue. It was really, really, really odd, though, because my brother and I never really got on. There was a lot of fights between us all of the time. But I think that came from the education my father and my mother gave to us, because their families were exactly the same. So it was kind of hereditary that this, education was passed down. And so we were never taught to show emotions. It was kind of like love or hate all of the time. And I just remember I was 7 years old at the time, and I was playing ball in the back garden with my brother, and we're throwing the tennis ball to each other, and all that separated the two gardens were about like a foot of chicken wire each side. That dangerous, deadly stuff. If you trip over it, absolute nightmare. Well, I did. Well, my brother threw me this ball. I went to retrieve it, and in my next door neighbour's garden, what they would do is they were heavy drinkers, and they would throw their bottles into the back garden to smash. So the whole back garden was littered with glass, and they moved out. So we're playing ball. I missed the ball. I turn around to retrieve the ball, run over into the next door neighbour's garden, forget about the chicken wire, trip over, and hand plant straight onto a shard of glass. You listeners can't see it, but it's probably about 3 inches big. It was coming out of the center of my hand. And I just remember looking at this shard of glass and almost passing out, blood pouring everywhere, spurting out. I burst into tears. Mum, mum, go running back into the kitchen. My mum elevates my hand and she gets the kitchen sink plug, puts it into the kitchen sink, starts to run warm water. She elevates my hand, and the next thing she does, now listeners, you may, if you're a bit squeamish, you might want to hold your ears on this one. She yanked the piece of glass straight out of my hand and then put my hand into this water. Now, little Steve, 7 years old, ball in his eyes out, blood everywhere. My mum was brutal, by the way. What do you think mum says to me at this point?
Well, I got a couple things in mind, but based on your story, it sounds like it's going to be pretty harsh.
Yeah, and it was. There was a few expletives, and you know what she said? Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about.
I've heard that a couple times in my childhood.
7 years old. Imagine being told that. And big boys don't cry, man up. You know, all these sayings that we hear as young boys. But then what do we do with those emotions from that very young age?
We're taught to men don't cry, men don't show emotion, figure it out and move on.
Absolutely. So we kind of rub our eyes, go back out, go and play ball in the back garden within minutes. But what does that do with all these emotions? It buries them. We bury those emotions, and we can talk about our emotions. We can't cry, can't look weak because we're the alpha male, we're the provider, we're we're the person that's got everything together that doesn't cry. We're the strong male. Well, sadly, that comes out later on in life because we're suppressing all these emotions and we don't know how to express them. So going back to the story, 14 years of age, 15 years of age, the morning, Friday, 13th September, my brother says to me, Steve, would you like to come and meet my new partner, my new girlfriend this evening? Of which I declined. I said, no, what would I want to do that for? See, we didn't really get on. So I said, no. So he went off to work. He was 16 by this time. He went off to work and I went to school. And came back from school, went out as I normally would, and I didn't see my brother. And he was still working, so I'd gone by the time he had come home. So later on that evening, and I just remember it was a lovely sunny evening, I came home at about 8 o'clock and I walk into my front room. I just remember it being very quiet, but weird, very tense and intense at the same time. My dad's pacing. Now, my dad doesn't pace, he normally just came home and relaxed. And my dad said, Steve, your brother, he said, he's supposed to have called by now. I said, okay, what's going on? He said, where he is, there's been a really big car accident, a very big crash. I said, okay, should we go down and have a look? He said, you stay here. In case he calls, I'll go. So my dad went to the crash scene and he came back an hour later. So he's back at about 9:30. And now my brother should have been home at 9 o'clock. And still nothing. We're listening to the news. There's been a big accident, police cars, ambulance, all the services, emergency services were at this site. And hours pass. And finally, there was a knock on the door at 11 p.m. And my dad ran to the door thinking it may be my brother. And he opened the door and there's 2 police officers stood at the door. And I just remember my dad stood back and the police officer said, Mr. Carr, I'm afraid we've got some tragic news. Your son Paul has been killed in a car accident tonight by 2 drunk drivers. But then kind of instantly my dad just broke down into tears and we were all shocked. We really didn't know what to do. It was awful hearing that news that my brother had been killed. but he'd been killed. The accident happened actually at 7 o'clock. And sadly, we were not told until 11 o'clock. What happened is two guys had been out to work and they decided to go down to the pub after work. They finished fairly early, went to the pub, had a couple of drinks and said, let's get in the cars and drive home. So they did. And the road that they were on, and my brother and 5 other children were on, is a very long stretch of road. In fact, it's a 3-mile stretch of road, one of the largest in Swindon. And the two guys decided to race along this stretch of road. So they've both been drinking, they're racing along this stretch of road. And one car hits the back of the other car and careers off of the road and onto the right-hand side of the road with 5 children sat on a bench. And one of those children was actually an adult. It was my brother. Car comes off of the road, hits the curb, flips, rolls over the bench and killed all 5 children.
Wow.
Sadly, my brother was in that accident. Now, this happened in 1991, but there was no real help that we could turn to without fear, again, of being, at the time in 1991, being locked up or worse. So my father actually chose not to go for any help. And he said, no, I'll manage it. I'll help the family out. We'll be okay. That was probably one of the worst things that he could have ever have done. So for years, my father carried that trauma around with him and the loss of his son. And so did we as children. And so every time somebody would ask me or get very close to me, because from an early age, I'd been conditioned not to talk, I would just push them away. So you can see how this works now with jobs and people and relationships, is I push jobs away. Anything that would get close to me, I'd push them away in fear that I would lose them, but also that I couldn't talk about my emotions because I was conditioned not to. So this trauma and pain that we'd gone through stayed with all of us. And my family had within a year had separated. My mum and dad had divorced within a year, and I was asked to leave the family home within a year. And I left the family home and didn't speak to my father again then until I was 30 years old. When I was 30 years old, I went back home and said, Dad, could I come home and save for a house? And this was 2008. And do you remember what happened to the economy in 2008? Yeah, it tanked. It took a bit of a nosedive. And so I capitalized on that fact and bought my first house in 2008. And things were going well. I was working for Unilever as a business development manager. Life was going well. Had my first house. And I was a real socialite. So I was going out all the time. And I just remember I was out one night and somebody introduced me to cocaine. Now they said, it's good, it'll help you stay awake, it'll help you stay, it'll give you confidence and it'll just make you have a better night. And I thought, you know what, why not? Let's give this.
Why not? That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it does, it sounds amazing. So I did this line of cocaine, had the best night ever. But sadly, what I didn't know at the time is that one line of cocaine would turn me into a functioning habit, I'd gain a functioning habit. And so I'd become an addict. And that one line soon progressed into 1 gram on a Friday. And that soon progressed into 1 gram a day. And that soon escalated to 3 grams a day, where I was taking 1/8 or 3 grams of cocaine a day. And it was costing me £100 to fund this habit. Now, after a while, I stopped paying my mortgage, and the mortgage company said, Steve, we'd like to help you, but I ignored it. And I remember selling everything in my house until I was in my house in just a sleeping bag. I had nothing else left. And my house was evicted. And so I was evicted from my house. It was repossessed. My house was repossessed. And I was made homeless. And so I lived on the streets for a little while before a friend of mine that I went to school with come across me and said, Steve, what the hell? And so I couldn't tell him what was going on, what the drivers were for all of this, because I felt so ashamed that I couldn't tell him, but he took me home for a while. In that period of a month where I was staying with him, I managed to get myself clean again. And I say clean, I stopped using drugs for a little while. That was until I went back into the world of business development and started working for a very large company that you may be aware of called Marlboro Cigarettes. Very big in the States, and started working for them. And this was for a few years, and then things just got a little bit too much for me. And so I'm still taking the drugs. I'm still doing them in the evenings and weekends, but I'm a functioning addict. So I go to work. So I'm taking cocaine evenings and weekends, not when I'm working. And this was at the point then that everything was getting a little bit too much for me. So this brings us up to 2015. And this was the point that I experienced the mental health breakdown in the workplace. Now, I didn't know that it was a mental health breakdown. I didn't know what it was. I just thought maybe I was experiencing burnout. I didn't relate it to all of those significant events that happened in my past. So I now know that it was, that everything had stemmed from that childhood, all of those adverse experiences, all of those traumatic events came out 25 years later. After the third suicide attempt, I visited my doctor and told them the truth. I said, please help me. I'm an addict. I need help. And you know what my doctor said? Thank you for coming in. And it was because of my GP and my doctor saying, thank you for coming in, that I was able to turn my life around. See, at that point, I had nothing, literally nothing, and nothing to give, nothing to live for. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, high functioning anxiety, work-related stress, depression, unresolved childhood trauma, and addiction. And then came the hard work. Because I'd been diagnosed with this, it made it a little bit easier for me to figure out what I needed to do to help myself recover. So I packed my bag with little belongings that I did have. I had £100 to my name, and I made my way down to Land's End, which is the furthest point south of England. And then I decided to walk the entire length of Britain in recovery. I walked for 90 days telling my story, finding out what help was available for me and other men in a similar position to me, whilst also helping myself. So I'd volunteer at night at food banks, and then in the daytime I would find organizations helping people with mental health and also homelessness, something that I'd experienced. So I managed to go on BBC and ITV television, started a group on Facebook called Mindcanyon, and this is where the idea for my business came up. And in 90 days, I grew my group from 0 people to 11,000 people in just 90 days. After a little while, I thought, there's a lot of people in here like me that are stuck. What can I do here? So I went along on a mental health first aid course and a suicide first aid course in my recovery, and thought maybe if I become a tutor and a teacher and a trainer in this particular field, maybe I can help more people. And that is where my business came from 5 years ago. I turned my group into a business, but it's only really taken off within the last 3 years. And here's the reason why. I wasn't ready. I was still in suffering. I was still in pain. I still hadn't recovered from the suicide attempts, from the diagnosis. And I wasn't in a place to help other people, because I needed to put my own oxygen mask on first before helping others. And I recognize now that I was still stuck. I was stuck in the story. I was still with my diagnosis. So that kind of brings us up to why and how my business has come about.
Yeah. So, and I want to get into the business part. I want to get into what you're doing now, and because that's where you and I met, right? We're in the same business training group, right? And that, so we both work with the same business coach, Smoker. That's how you and I met. And man, there's so much to talk about here, and I know we've only got so much time, and I really want to get to what you're doing, because that's really why you're here. There's a couple things though. Is so the idea of we are a combination of nature and nurture. We're a combination of, yes, we are biological beings and we inherit certain things from our whoever we come from, right?
Yeah.
And it's been shown that, things can be passed down, personality and attitude and perspective, and there's certain things that we inherit, right?
Yeah.
It's not 100%. We can change those things, but when you add nature on top of that, and you're brought up in a tough house, and you're taught to, man up and just deal with it, like you talked about. And I have some similar experiences where I was brought up in one of those houses. It was tough upbringing. We see some things and we hear some things, and we learn primarily through modeling. Even as adults, we learn primarily by modeling what we see and hear, right? And to take responsibility for that. One of my favorite things in some of the coaching that I do is, okay, that happened, now what? And that statement or that question is not meant to minimize what you've experienced, not even the slightest, because I am a huge advocate for mental health counseling and therapy. I've done lots of it, and some of it's been okay. Sometimes same as you, I wasn't in the position to accept the help or do anything about it, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea of, okay, I got it. Like, it was tough. I'm going to be 47 this month. Like, how much am I going to talk about when I was 13 years old? At some point, there's a decision that you have to do something about it. And there's healing that needs to be done. And I can't even say that I'm fully healed from what I experienced, because I still talk about it. So clearly there's something there. But talking through it is a beginning, right? Because you said that when you did your walk, you finally were at a point where you made the decision, and nobody can do it for you. Nobody can do it. All the resources in the world were going to do you no good if you were not willing and ready to do something about it. Extremely important. And I think that connection with whatever it was with you that clicked. So at that point, you said that you had nothing left. What was it that clicked in you that suddenly you were ready to say, I got to do something? And then you talked to your doctor. What was one of the things that I like to talk about is having having a band of brothers. What was your band of brothers like? Who did you have around you prior to and then after that? And then what was the click for you?
Okay, really, really good question, that. And this might shock you, is my band of brothers were all drug dealers. Nobody around me. See, I pushed my family away because I didn't want them to know. I didn't want them to get hurt. The people that I was dealing with, would threaten your life, would threaten the life of your family, your parents, anyone that was associated with you. Anything that they could leverage against you, they would. And these were not people to mess with. I had my life threatened many times, had a gun to my head once as well. They're not the type of people to mess with. So the only people that I had around me were the people that I didn't want to associate with any longer. So it was, one, my environment is all wrong. Two, the people I'm associating with, I don't want to be associated with these people anymore because I'm becoming like them. And so what I wanted, the catalyst for the change, was this. My third suicide attempt, I took a fatal overdose that should have killed me. I know this. But whilst I was slipping in and out of unconsciousness, I just remember seeing faces, and one was my nan, one was my brother, and they said, "Steve, come with us. You're safe now." And when I woke up, I remembered seeing it, but I also remembered that at one point in my life, I had everything. I had a car, I had a fiance, I had my own house, and things were great. They were so good. How did I let it get this way? I can get that back. In fact, I can do better. I can do much better. The thought of actually dying, and maybe I didn't want to die. Maybe I just wanted the pain to stop. And that's the thing with most people thinking about suicide. They don't want their lives to end. They just want the pain to stop. So for me, it was, I want that pain to stop. How can I get this pain to stop? I know I'll end my life because then I know the pain will stop. But because I'd seen what the other side held, I didn't want to be there either. So it's like I was given this second opportunity. And then that's when I started to live. That's when I started to ask for help. After all the years of not asking for help, to get to the point where I was isolated, lonely, on my own, no friends, no family, I needed to ask for help, or otherwise I was going to die.
And so going to, I get mixed thoughts on the idea of you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with. I think there is some truth to that, that you either attract the people that are similar to you, or you become more like the people that you hang out with, right? Mm-hmm. So what was the change after? So after you reached out, you talk about doing the walk, and you started telling your story, and you started exploring resources for you and for other people. What was the change in the community of people that you were around?
Again, really, really, really good question. So on the walk, what I wanted to establish was, am I normal? That was just, am I normal or am I abnormal? I don't know. And so I started getting into the world of personal development and self-development, Tony Robbins and Eckhart Tolle, and the likes of those guys, and really starting to understand my mind, starting to understand, like you've said, there is, we're the average of the 5 people that we associate ourselves with. So I started associating with other people that were in the personal development world, other people that had overcome adversities like me. So I was starting to associate with people then that wanted to explore their minds, wanted to explore the universe, wanted to explore the, everything about consciousness. And that's where my journey began. So I started to hang around with coaches, and that's how I met our tutor, as it were, in the same business community. I went to a talk, I was delivering a talk, and he came up to me afterwards and said, stories are so very similar, but told in different ways. And that's how we met, because I was telling my story on a stage. And then I was starting to associate with more people that were doing really, really well in life, really successful. And so I started associating with them, and I was asking them how they became so successful. And then they were showing me things like The Secret and, Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, and Stephen R. Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I started reading. I started taking on all this information. I started to find out what my values were. I started to find out how I could take control of my life and actually influence what happens in my life. So I started associating with people that were more positive, not toxic positive, but just people that could see the bigger picture, that were looking at life in a completely different way. And I'd never seen life this way before, ever. And it changed my life. And so now, my life is about gratitude. It's about serving. It's about helping other people. It's about what can I give? And that really, really sits well with what I do now, because I'm giving people the skills to stay alive, and they'll pass it on. I remember once I was contacted when I did my walk, and somebody gave me some information. They said, Steve, what I want you to do with this information is always pay it forwards. And it was just, I can't remember what the information was now, but that stuck with me. And they said, Steve, whatever you learn, pay it forward for somebody else, bring them up with you. And that really stuck with me.
Well, and that's a good transition to, so what is it that you're doing now so you are a mental health first aid, suicide first aid trainer. What does that mean? What do you do?
Okay, so I deliver mental health first aid and suicide first aid training to organizations. So what that does, it enables people to have conversations about mental health. So currently, only around about 13% of managers in any business within the United Kingdom have had any form of mental health training. So if we go back to my story, that tells us that there's people out there like me that can't talk to their organizations and managers about their mental health because they're not well equipped to do so. Now, it costs the economy anywhere between 49 and 53 billion pounds per year by not having this training. So there's things like presenteeism and absenteeism. That means people going to work with mental health issues and not being effective, which was me back, just 5 years ago. People aren't able to talk about mental health still. So what I do is go in and teach the managers, but also the employees, how to have a conversation around mental health. and how to signpost people to the relevant support should they discuss their mental health. So it's all about being kind, caring and compassionate, and being non-judgmental when somebody does speak to us about their mental health. And one thing I say to anybody that shares their story with a mental health first aider is always say thank you to that person. And the reason why is because that's what my GP said to me. And I've made an amazing recovery because of that person's actions and words. So if we would just say thank you for coming in and telling me, it could help that person get the recovery and the support that they need.
That's pretty powerful. Because I think there's, the idea of stigma and availability and resources and culture change is the idea of we do need to be a little bit more compassionate and empathetic, because everybody has their own story, everybody has their own experiences, and I don't want to be judgmental. And I've been in that position as a senior enlisted leader, that I have had people come to me, and I've had to, whether it be them with their personal issue, or being deployed and having somebody come in and say, look, my grandma's dying, the first words out of my mouth were, I'm really sorry. And I want to do everything I can, but I don't want to jump into action right away. Right. There's a time and a place for action, but sometimes people just need a moment. Right. So,
yeah.
And I think it's important. And let's make an analogy here, because you say first aid, right? Nobody's asking you to be the expert here. Right. If somebody sustains an injury and you call an ambulance, all I need you to do is just put pressure on the wound until the professionals show up. Right. That's what we're talking about here. We're not asking anybody to be a professional psychologist and solve problems. I'm not going to solve your problem, but I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to be your friend, and I'm going to be empathetic until I can find out or help guide you, or allow you to talk yourself into a position to, okay, where do I go from here? What now? Right. And I think that's the power in what you're doing is and that's why I think first aid is a great tag for what you're doing here, is that you're going in an organization and you're not solving individual problems. You're providing the framework and the roadmap for what do I do about it? And who do I talk to?
You are absolutely right. I think you've absolutely nailed it there. We're not teaching people to be therapists. We're not teaching people to be counselors or coaches. What we're doing is enabling them to have the skills to be able to be that first point of call until the professionals arrive, or until that person, like you say, talks them into that they need or want the help that is readily available. So it's, we are that person. We're the people in between. We're like an emergency service before the emergency services get there. Absolutely.
Right. So if you were to provide a short takeaway, like a I don't know, 15 to 30 second promo for, the release of this conversation, what do you want people to take away, not only from your story, which is a great story, and it's so common, right? How many of us were raised in that environment where at some point somebody said, you just get over it, right? Or something to that effect. And then your transition into adulthood and your experiences, there's so many similarities. And I think that many of us can identify with that, which is why I think storytelling is so important. But what's a short takeaway? What do you want people to know?
It's never a weakness to ask for help or accept help. It is a strength, and it's a sign of maturity as well. Asking for help can be difficult, and like I said earlier, we can take a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. So knowing that this help is readily available, and when we do ask for help, that it's okay, that it will be okay. So we just need to ask the right people. When we're asking for help, that we know that these people have had some form of training in mental health, and that they're not judgmental. We're probably overthinking it when we do go to ask for help. But people, I want listeners to know this, people want to help. People really want to help, because none of us want to see anybody in suffering. So I think my final takeaway from this would be, is it never a weakness to ask for help. So don't ever think it is.
And I think that's great on the account, the empathy part, right? Is we want people to feel like they can have the effective conversation, whether that be to your doctor, to a therapist, or a friend. And if you don't have somebody, and here's the accountability part, right? Because we talk about Champion Stepdad is founded on empathy and accountability, right? So let's also lean a little bit on the accountability part here, right? Which sometimes includes a little bit of tough love. Like if you listening right now, if you can't think of 3 people that you can call when you're facing some type of significant stress or adversity, I don't care what time it is or where they're located and what you're doing, if you can't think of at least 3 people that you can call and say, I need 10 minutes of your time or I need help, that's an issue.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And not only that is what's your mentality to not only have that conversation, but then also to be ready for the response, right? Yeah. Whatever that might be. That there is, again, going back to nobody can do it for you. All the resources can be available. If you're not ready for it, or if you're not in the right perspective or attitude or mindset, none of it is going to do well for you. Right. And that comes to, identity. I use the simple example of smokers. If you're a smoker and you want to quit smoking, and I ask you, do you identify as a smoker? Do you smoke or are you a smoker? Right? Because there's a big difference. And there's a lot of people I know that can't quit smoking because they're like, well, it's part of who I am. Well, you can't do it. Right. So there's a mentality there. Right. So if you're creating your own barriers, nobody's going to be able to do this for you. So there is the accountability part of how are you? And that's why I asked the question of you is after you made that switch, whether it was because somebody encouraged you or it just clicked in you, there had to be a change because you can't keep hanging out with the same people in the same environment. That's the accountability part. What are you doing to change? And that's why the other part of beyond empathy and accountability is the band of brothers. We have to have people to be able to have these kind of conversations. I need to be able to go out back with 2 or 3 of my best friends or associates and have an honest conversation and be ready for that honest feedback. I had a friend of mine, and I talk about this lots. One of my best friends was passing through on his way to see his daughter, and he stayed with us for 2 nights. And we were sitting out on the front porch, and kind of out of nowhere, he's like, look, man, I got a couple things I got to talk to you about. He's like, I've been observing you for the last 24 hours. And, we got to have a conversation. If you don't have that person in your life, you're missing something and you have to find it. And it's not something where you can just go find somebody, right? That's the kind of thing that has to be built over time, but you have to take the first step and you have to create the environment and the relationships. That's accountability.
That's so powerful. And for me, it's my fiance. It's amazing. She holds me accountable. If there's things that, she goes, I'm not really sure about that, she'll say. And it's good because we've got this wonderful relationship based on growth and truth. So finding out my values, first of all, that was super important to me. Telling my fiance about them, being open about my past, she knows everything about it. And likewise, that we grow with each other and she helps me. That was really important for me. So what I did in my recovery, and this is really important, is focused on the recovery. So what I mean by that is I created a recovery action plan. So mental health recovery action plan. And in that recovery plan, there's people that I would speak to. So the 3 F's I would use: faith, family, or friends. At any one point, I could speak to any one of those about what was going on. Then I would look at each and every aspect of my well-being. So that's spiritual well-being, financial well-being, environment, everything to do with well-being. And then, are you aware of the 12-step program? Have you ever heard of the 12-step program?
I've heard of versions of different steps programs.
Okay. So I was literally looking through this 12-step program, but actually implementing it before I knew about the 12-step program, which was take a permanent inventory of my life, keep doing this all of the time and see what is working, what isn't working. Make sure that I have nothing around me that is going to influence me in a bad way. So I need to think about my environment, get out of the toxic environment. I need to take anything out that is causing negativity and not allowing me to focus on purely my recovery, make amends to all the people that I had hurt in the past, but also turn my life over to a power bigger than me to say I need help with what was going on. Now, I didn't know that this was a 12-step program. I just thought I'll just do this myself before I was aware of it. And that's how I started on my recovery. And I used this document and I help people with this nowadays. Say, look, this is, if you want to complete life change, then you need to change everything. You can't just expect to have everything change and do the same thing. Einstein said something like, if you expect different results by doing the same thing, that's insanity or something like that, isn't it?
And also the idea of you can't solve the problem with the same mindset or thinking that got you into the problem in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So literally everything had to change. Everything, people that I was around, my attitude, my mindset, literally everything. And so I was fortunate. That's why I had 3 years off. I had 3 years out to research this, to, become qualified in counseling and coaching and many of the interventions that I was helped in, because that helped me stay well. And to this day, I've not been unwell since. So I've completely taken the holistic approach to cure, not taken the westernized, medicalized route. I actually took the holistic approach to cure, didn't take any medication. And to this day, I've not been ill.
Nice. So you and we're connected on Facebook and LinkedIn. I know you hang out a lot there. Your website, mindcanyon.co.uk. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, what would you say, point them to as the number one place to reach out to you?
Yeah, number one place to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. So look me up, Steve Carr. You'll see Mental Health First Aid and Managing Director of Mindcanyon. Then have a look on the website. You can drop me an email if you like, steve@mindcanyon.co.uk, if you'd like to inquire about mental health first aid or suicide first aid training for your organization.
Yeah, that's great. Definitely appreciate the amazing work that you're doing. You and I are going to stay connected, if nothing else, just through our business mentoring group that we're part of,
Sure.
which is just one more example of you can't do everything on your own. And that was probably the point where I started doing some of my best work, is where I let some things go and I let some people help me. Like, you can Google and YouTube a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that you should be doing them all. Like, there's resources out there, and we're not just talking about mental health. Several stepdad, men's Facebook groups, parenting groups, business groups. There's groups for everything, and it's not even just Facebook. What's in your local community as well. I've started hit that on, now that things are starting to open up again, is one of the things that I love to do is find parks where they do live music, set up by the local city or the community. And I've already started throwing that out there. Hey, you know what? On this day they're doing a live band. Let's get together, because it's great that we're connected like this. But there's something to be said for sitting down in a circle of friends and just having random conversations. That's how relationships and friendships are really built, is through experiences. And you find out that you start having little things in common with people, and then the differences seem less significant. And that's where you really make great connection. And having those people, and they may not become great friends, but just the fact that that somebody is out there facing similar challenges, that you all can build off of each other's encouragement. And I think there's something really, really powerful about building a band of brothers, so that you have that to lean on and to always go to.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I like something that you just said there, and it's something that I say a lot. We can't do this life alone. We can't do it alone. And what, like I say, I'll just reiterate that it's not a weakness to ask for help. It's a strength.
Yeah, man, that's real powerful. And I really appreciate your time. Steve Carr, over in the UK, mindcanyon.co.uk, LinkedIn, Facebook. Look him up, check him out, and be ready to have some great conversations, man. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for inviting me on, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Nick.